Hey, how's it going everyone? It is Rosie here, and today we are going to investigate a beloved friend of ours from the Fallout games, Dogmeat. This canine companion has been part of Fallout since the very beginning. So what's going on here? How is it that in nearly every Fallout game, a dog finds its way to the player character and always ends up being named Dogmeat? Does Bethesda have some secret bit of lore about this? Yes, they do. Former BGS developer Joel Burgess confirms that they indeed do in this quote. Anyone looking for confirmation of their preferred Dogmeat origin lore, sorry, there are several intentionally conflicting clues to this in the game. I can't/won't tell you which theory is true. So this confirms 1, that they did place hints in Fallout 4 for multiple Dogmeat origin theories, and 2, that there is a correct theory. At least as of Fallout 4, there is a canon backstory for Dogmeat. So to solve this mystery, we need to focus on this game, because we don't know if this canon backstory was established prior to Fallout 4. And based on my research, my guess is that it was not. I think that Bethesda thought of this idea during Fallout 4's development, and that there was no established Dogmeat origin lore by Black Isle or Bethesda prior to this. Though that leads us to another question we need to address. Does this Dogmeat origin lore encompass all Dogmeats, or does it only apply to Fallout 4's Dogmeat? So some of the theories I have here can easily work for all the Dogmeats, but some only really work for Fallout 4's. So I'm not going to tell you my guess for that question right now, because then you'd know which theories I like and which ones I don't. But in the end, when I do crown a winning theory, that will speak for itself. Now let's go over some background about Fallout 4's Dogmeat. Bethesda uses quest objectives to steer the player into Dogmeat early on in the game. He joyfully greets the sole survivor at the Red Rocket truck stop and can immediately be recruited as a companion, seemingly implying that he is trained. This particular Dogmeat appears to be a purebred German Shepherd, which is noteworthy considering that the world has been destroyed for 200 years, so purebred dogs must be pretty rare. Fallout 4's Dogmeat is actually based on Joel Burgess's German Shepherd River, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. Joel announced River's passing on Twitter, though it's now known as X, and he had some interesting things to say about River and her influence on Dogmeat. You see, Dogmeat isn't primarily focused on killing your enemies, he's protecting you, often throwing himself directly in harm's way, giving you time plus opportunity to deal with the threat yourself. If you've ever had a German Shepherd, you understand. And I suppose this gets at the big idea behind Dogmeat's relationship to you in Fallout 4. Like your character, Dogmeat is caught out of time. This dog doesn't belong here, and neither do you. Anyone looking for confirmation of their preferred Dogmeat origin lore, sorry, there are several intentionally conflicting clues to this in the game. I can't/won't tell you which theory is true. Fallout is all about exploring a world of bizarre creatures, places, scenarios, and characters. Companion NPCs are a rogues gallery running the gamut from a thespian super mutant to an android gumshoe. The strange thing about Dogmeat is that nothing's strange about Dogmeat. Dogmeat is a tedder. He grounds you in the world, will always stand by you, lead you to your family, and anticipate your needs. He wants you to be safe and happy. In other words, he loves you. So Joe gave us some things to work with here, and I want to mention that he is a developer of interest for this mystery. Given that Dogmeat is based on his dog, what he had to say here, and the rest of my research, I believe that Joel was heavily involved in setting this mystery up. I mean, in that post, he told us that he has knowledge of multiple clue trails that are designed to lead us to different theories. So considering all this, he seems to have been very personally involved in designing and writing Fallout 4's Dogmeat. Now let's go over some in-game details so we have them in mind for the theories. Dogmeat has a tendency to show up at very convenient times, such as happening to be at the Red Rocket along the road to anywhere the sole survivor might realistically go upon leaving Vault 111, and appearing right outside the door to Kellogg's house when it's time to track Kellogg down regardless of what dialogue options are chosen with Nick. Dogmeat is also seemingly trained, since he can follow commands and understands what to do when presented with Kellogg cigars. And he's curiously well networked. Nick tells us that Dogmeat has helped him with cases before, and apparently he was traveling with Preston Garvey's group on their way to Sanctuary, and they sent him to go get help when they got cornered at the Museum of Freedom. When Mama Murphy is asked about his owner, she says you can't own a free spirit like that. Now it's time for theories. I've got 5 of them for you this time. There's 2 in here that have been popular theories for a while, so I crafted my own versions of them for this video. There's also one in here that's based on very new information that I expect to pick up some steam in the coming months. And 2 theories that, to my knowledge, are entirely new. I'm not aware of any theories out there that are remotely similar to these 2, which makes them the most fun to present for me. Let's start with one of those. I've never seen anyone speculate that Dogmeat could be tied to the Eldritch paranormal sphere of the Fallout series. For those who don't know, the paranormal has existed within the Fallout universe arguably since the first game. However, back in Fallouts 1 and 2, it was more that the Black Isle devs found it fun to implement things from classic fictional works into the games as Easter eggs. That was a different age of game development when things like, say, canon weren't really taken as seriously as they are now. But when Bethesda acquired Fallout, they leaned further into there being supernatural elements of the Fallout universe, and they incorporated some things from the first 2 games into that. It's unknown if all of it is considered part of the same magical/supernatural sphere, if you will, or if there are a few different spheres that are unrelated to each other. I currently lean more on the latter, but I could change my mind in the future as I make more discoveries and do more videos like this one. But one sphere that I definitely think encompasses more than most fans realize is what I've taken to calling the Eldritch sphere, which is inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft. As I said before, Black Isle Studios did adapt things from classic fictional works into Fallout, but the Lovecraft influence really starts with Bethesda. And I believe that Bethesda combined some of Black Isle's ideas with the Lovecraftian elements they added. A notable example of this is the mysterious stranger, which I covered a few months back. So could Bethesda have done this with Dogmeat? Could they have merged the various Dogmeats from each of the games with the Eldritch paranormal sphere like I theorized they did with the mysterious stranger? Well, everything in the Eldritch sphere is inspired by Lovecraft, so if Dogmeat is part of this, then there should be something in the Lovecraft mythos that Bethesda's versions of Dogmeat are based on. Going off that, I did some research into the Lovecraft mythos, or more commonly called the Cthulhu mythos, looking for a match. In other words, I was asking, is there something in here that bears any symbolic, literary, or otherwise artistic similarities to Dogmeat? And I did find something that could make sense here, a creature called a Shoggoth. Apparently, the ruling gods of the Cthulhu mythos, which are called the Old Ones, created Shoggoths to be servants. Their true form is a blob of gelatinous flesh, but they can shapeshift in order to best suit whatever the Old Ones wanted them to do. They have a variety of sizes, but don't have a fixed volume, as in one that has, let's say, the mass of a bear can smush itself into the volume of a dog. During the early days of their existence, they did not have consciousness since the Old Ones did not intend for them to be able to think for themselves. But over time, they developed consciousness on their own and eventually rebelled against the Old Ones and won, becoming free to live as they wish. So could Dogmeat be the Fallout Eldritch sphere's equivalent of a Shoggoth? The fit is definitely here. First, it explains him being a purebred German Shepherd, despite that being very unlikely. Perhaps he just shapeshifted into one. And as Joel put it, Dogmeat anticipates the sole survivor's needs, so perhaps this Shoggoth chose the form of a German Shepherd because it anticipated that the sole survivor would eventually need a good tracking dog. Also, Dogmeat doesn't have an owner. As Mama Murphy puts it, he's a free spirit, which fits very well with the history of the Shoggoths rebelling against the Old Ones to become free. And Dogmeat is very good at assisting people. What were Shoggoths designed to be? Servants. But Dogmeat does not assist people because he has to, he does it because he wants to. He seems to have his own wants and desires that are primarily based on helping people that he likes. And this theory would explain why he seems to be such a complex individual despite appearing to be a dog. Shoggoths are intelligent, so perhaps when it appears that he's a very well-trained pooch, it's really just that he understands what's being asked of him because he is an intelligent creature. Furthermore, if Dogmeat is a supernatural being, then there's really no need to explain how he shows up at convenient times, because it could just be assumed that he has ways of anticipating things like that. Lastly, from a development point of view, this idea for Dogmeat can easily incorporate the Dogmeats from past games as well without causing any issues. It doesn't really retcon anything. So this theory is definitely very fitting, however it's mainly based on speculation. There isn't really much in the way of in-game clues for it. This next theory comes from the new Fallout TV show. In the opening of episode 2, we see Wilzig living his life in some sort of Enclave base. And during this sequence, we see that the Enclave is mass-producing German Shepherds somehow, either through cloning or lots of breeding. And later on, we find out that some Brotherhood of Steel presence in the Commonwealth informed the West Coast division of the Brotherhood about Wilzig, which seemingly implies that this Enclave base is either in or nearby to the Commonwealth. Also, the new Fallout 4 Next Gen update establishes that there is an Enclave presence in the Commonwealth. So all this raises the question, is Dogmeat one of these Enclave German Shepherds that maybe escaped somehow? It's possible, but all this information is very new, and according to Joel, Bethesda hid clues about Dogmeat's origin in the original cut of the game. And I have not found anything in the vanilla game that could suggest this theory is true, so this is unlikely in my opinion. Now it's time for the most popular Dogmeat theory out there. Could he be a synth? After all, that would explain why he seems to be trained, because that could all just be programming. Also, the fact that Dogmeat is very well networked with noteworthy inhabitants of the Commonwealth would suit the Institute's goals very well, since they make a habit of using Sims to keep tabs on the outside world. Furthermore, upon entering the Institute for the first time, Father admits that it's no coincidence that the sole survivor's path crossed Kellogg's path. But he doesn't say how exactly he made that happen. At this point in the questline, the sole survivor and Nick Valentine had searched Kellogg's house and came up empty. The only thing of any slight minuscule note they found was a peculiar brand of cigars, and by some miracle, Nick Valentine and, depending on player choice, the sole survivor just happened to know of a friendly dog that also just happens to be a breed that can track scents for miles. And regardless of what dialogue options are chosen with Nick, he's always right outside the door when you leave. That's all extremely convenient, isn't it? In other words, Father says that he is responsible for making the sole survivor's path and Kellogg's path cross, and it's Dogmeat that actually does make these two paths cross. So the implication here could be that Father somehow made Dogmeat take the sole survivor to Kellogg, and how could he have done that? The logical explanation is that Dogmeat is a synth. Another thing that I'll point out is that if the sole survivor has not met Dogmeat, though that's very unlikely, then Nick Valentine will have the following dialogue option available.
Any suggestions, Nick?
Guess it's time to call in a favor. I know a specialist. He's never in one place for long, but he'll show up if I ask.
Who's this friend of yours, Nick?
Worked with him a few times, but he only likes certain people. Got a feeling you'll get on, though. You'll meet soon enough. Gonna send out the signal. It's a special frequency, so you won't hear it, but he will. Okay, I called him. Let's wait outside.
So what's peculiar about this? Well, whichever dev wrote this dialogue chose to write it as if Nick is talking about a peer. Nothing in here suggests we're talking about a dog. So perhaps they're using this dialogue to hint something to us. Maybe the idea is if Nick is a synth and Dogmeat is his peer, his equal, then what does that make Dogmeat, another synth? Moreover, we know that the Institute does make animal sims. From information in the game, we can gather that they have made gorilla, Brahmin, and crow sims. However, there is no confirmation that they have ever made dog sims. But there are a few clues that suggest that they may have. First, the animal sims are a bioscience division project, which is led by Clayton Holdren. And if we search his quarters, we'll find Astoundingly Awesome Tales issue 12 Have Dog Will Travel on his balcony, which has a German Shepherd on the cover, and its effect is that canine companions take 10% less damage. And there's a terminal entry in the bioscience lab in which Holdren does say that he is thinking about what kinds of animals they could make sims of. So maybe the idea is the comic inspired him to try dogs. Also, when you think about how the Institute uses sims on the surface, a dog would make a lot of sense. They're common pets, and raiders and mercenary types often utilize them in combat. So the Institute could easily use dog sims to spy on people in their residencies and keep tabs on organizations like the Gunners and the Minutemen. So combining this with what we've already established about how Dogmeat would make sense as a sim really forms a strong theory. However, there is a noteworthy flaw. Dogmeat does not have a synth component, though that can easily be reconciled. First, if he had one, then this would not be a mystery. We would know that this theory is true, which is not Bethesda's MO at all. Second, Dogmeat is essential. He can only actually be killed with tampering. So why bother adding a synth component if he's not even supposed to be killable? And third, maybe not having a synth component is part of the mystery. There's actually reason to believe that there is such thing as Gen 4 sims, or at least prototype Gen 4s. This was actually something I wanted to put in my Is the Sole Survivor a Synth video, but I guess I cut it for time. And a few commenters actually did suggest this. So let's do some shoutouts. Thomas Teves, Hesheria, Red Dog Forge, Camaro AMX, Steadfast, and Jeremiah Robinson. Very keen eyes, folks. Now back to Gen 4 sims. Let me ask you something. If the Institute were to make a stride in synthetic organics that would warrant designating these new sims as a new generation, what would that big stride be? The thing that comes to mind for me is complete organics, as in no sim components, no robotic parts, no metal at all, just organic tissue. So are there any possible clues that could suggest that the Institute was working on something like this? Well, this ties into another Institute mystery. Why were they studying FEV? Well, if I lived in the Fallout universe and I wanted to make completely organic sims, this is likely where I would start. Also, I said we're studying FEV, but we know that Clayton Holdren does still collect super mutant tissue samples, which he claims are for improving their crops, but maybe he's lying. Additionally, using FEV to make Gen 4 sims would explain how they worked around an obvious problem. If they're completely organic, then how would the Institute control them like they do the other sims? Well, one possibility is to link them to some sort of hive mind, so they'll work like soldier ants taking orders from an ant queen. And the Master, the antagonist from Fallout 1, was an FEV hive mind. So we know FEV can be used to make a hive mind. Another possible means of controlling completely organic sims would be doing it with some sort of psychosis, like how Dr. Steiner used the numbers broadcast to control Alex Mason in the first Black Ops. The Institute does use radio broadcasts for teleportation, so we know that they can do some pretty advanced things with that kind of technology. Hence, I don't think using it to control Gen 4 sims is out of the question. Furthermore, there's a terminal entry we should discuss called Unique Project. This was actually cut from the game post-release, which I think was more than likely because this specific entry gave us too many clues pertaining to a few Fallout 4 mysteries. And yes, I do believe this is the terminal entry Todd Howard was referring to in his interview with Pete Holmes. Here's the section relevant for our purposes. In select Gen 3 units, the synthetic brain is indeed capable of accepting specific enhancements to the visual cortex, basal ganglia, and right parietal cortex. So what's significant about this? Well, those are all parts of the human brain, but according to this terminal entry, synth brains have them as well. So modern Gen 3 sims seem to have brains that are very similar to human brains, which suggests that when this terminal entry was written, the Institute was not far away from complete organics. Though in my opinion, this is weak evidence because it's coming from cut content. Even though it was cut post-release, it is still cut from the game, but I figured it was worth tossing in here. So perhaps Dogmeat is a Gen 4 synth and therefore does not have a synth component. Or maybe Bethesda simply didn't bother giving him one for one of the other reasons I mentioned before, and I spent the last minute talking about nothing. Or another possibility, maybe this theory is wrong and Dogmeat is not a synth. However, the clues for this one are by far the strongest of any Dogmeat theory out there, which is why this is such a popular theory. In summary, this is a strong theory, and I think there's a good chance it's the right one. If you're nostalgic, then I think you'll love this next theory. What if Dogmeat isn't supernatural, isn't a synth, and really is just a well-trained dog? So well-trained that even random people he happens to befriend in his travels can instruct him to do very specific things, like looking for help and tracking people with his sense of smell. Is there a dog trainer in the Fallout universe that is good enough to train a dog that well? There just might be. How about Desmond Lockhart from the Point Lookout DLC? He's a very good dog trainer, and if the Lone Wanderer sides with him during a meeting of the minds, he will say that he intends to travel north to pursue his next rival. The Commonwealth is north of Point Lookout, and there are things to be found there that Desmond would have an interest in. One place that I've always found peculiar is the Boylston Club, which is along the Boston Common. Upon taking the elevator, one will discover a little bar littered with a bunch of skeletons and lots of bottles of poisoned wine. So what the heck is this place and what happened here? The terminal holds those answers. Apparently, the Boylston Club was a high-class social club made up of various wealthy and influential people, including former presidents, vice presidents, senators, justices, governors, and other high-status individuals. And just before the bombs fell, they drank this wine together as a final celebration of the world that was. These are exactly the sorts of people that Desmond would have an interest in, powerful players of the great game. So I've always wondered if Desmond ever journeyed north and tracked this place down hoping to gather intel about his rivals, because this would be a very promising lead for him. There aren't any obvious clues in here that could imply that Desmond was ever here, but it would be very fitting. So is it possible that Desmond traveled to the Commonwealth and Dogmeat was originally his dog? Well, there are some notable issues with this notion. First, back in 2022, Kenneth Figu from Chat of Fallout 76 podcast and founder and organizer of Fallout for Hope actually did a video with the aforementioned Joel Burgess. And Joel was the lead designer of Point Lookout. In the video, Ken asked him this: Desmond in here also makes vague references to traveling north in pursuit of other rivals. Did you guys ever throw around of what those adventures might look like, or was there maybe a plan to use Desmond in the future? Joel responded, no, I think we just really liked the sort of Kessel Run thing, right? We liked leaving some open hooks that we could always come back and get your imagination on what else might happen. And if we ever came back to these characters, cool, and if we didn't, then at least it felt like they implied more than just they exist to fulfill your fantasy for this DLC. So this isn't necessarily a veto for this theory, because remember, Joel cannot talk about Dogmeat's origin, but he did confirm that this was left open-ended because they were considering that they might revisit the story eventually. So perhaps going into Fallout 4, it did occur to them that Desmond did say he was going north and they decided that he was Dogmeat's original owner, which is why he is so well trained. However, there are other issues with this theory. Depending on player choice during Point Lookout, Desmond can die. So this theory would assume that the Lone Wanderer made certain choices in Point Lookout. Also, even if Desmond is Dogmeat's original owner, then where is he now? I suppose maybe he died, went feral, or otherwise got separated from Dogmeat. But there's nothing to suggest that any of those things are the case. The one big thing that this theory does have going for it is that Joel Burgess was the lead designer of Point Lookout. So this is a character that he was personally invested in, perhaps enough so that he decided to involve him in a mystery he was setting up for another character that holds a special place in his heart, which is of course Dogmeat. But this is all just so speculative. It is an entertaining theory, but not a strong one. The last theory I have for you doesn't function on its own. It's something we can stack with the Shoggoth theory, the Synth theory, and I suppose the Enclave theory. But we're just going to do the first two because I think it's rather clear that those are the two best theories we have here. If you explore the House of Tomorrow in the prologue, you'll actually find a dog bowl, and if activated, the sole survivor will say, "I'll never be able to find that dog." The implication here seems to be that Nate and Nora have a dog, but it ran away or got lost recently. So one theory that some fans throw out there is that Dogmeat could somehow be Nate and Nora's original dog from 2077. Obviously, there's something missing there. How could a dog survive in a nuclear wasteland for 200 years? Well, if we combine this with some of the theories we've discussed so far, it can make sense. Let's start with the Lovecraft theory. I say Lovecraft and not Shoggoth because Dogmeat actually does not need to be a Shoggoth for this first possibility to work out. If you've seen my Mysterious Stranger video, then you know that I theorize he's tied to all this Lovecraft stuff too, and that there's actually something else in the prologue that could be meant to hint that he is somewhere nearby too, which is this lone pack of Grey Tortoise cigarettes. So if the stranger is somewhere nearby during the prologue, then perhaps he brought Nate and Nora's dog to the future with his supernatural powers. After all, Dogmeat has a way of showing up when it's convenient, and who else in the Fallout universe can we say that about? Moreover, the Red Rocket truck stop where the sole survivor meets Dogmeat also contains Grey Tortoise cigarettes. Though it's not really surprising to find cigarettes at a gas station, but there could be a bit of truth here. Another possibility is that maybe Nate and Nora's dog was always a Shoggoth and has a long lifespan, so it simply waited 200 years. We do know that the Dumb Witch cult started before the bombs fell, so all these Eldritch entities of the Fallout universe seemingly predate the bombs, so if Shoggoths exist in Fallout, they should predate the bombs as well. Now let's see how Dogmeat being Nate and Nora's dog can work with the Synth theory. This is really pretty simple. We know that the dog bowl is there in the prologue, so perhaps the Institute got the dog's DNA from the bowl and used that to create a synth of it. And that's the Dogmeat we know from the game. But each of these possibilities requires motive. Why give the sole survivor their dog from the past? Well, if Dogmeat is a Shoggoth with its own motives, then it's likely simply out of love. Like Joel said, he loves the sole survivor and wants to protect them. As for the Mysterious Stranger and the Institute, the most likely reason is that Dogmeat is important for their own personal goals for the sole survivor. In the Institute's case, Father knew that they would need Dogmeat to find Kellogg. The Stranger's case is much harder because we know so little about his intentions. But there's one more bit of motive that works for each of these possible culprits. As Joel Burgess said, Dogmeat is a tether. He grounds the sole survivor in the world, will always stand by them and anticipate their needs. He wants the sole survivor to be safe and happy. So perhaps the Stranger, the Institute, or Dogmeat himself gave the sole survivor their dog from the past as a means of maintaining the sole survivor's mental health and well-being in this dangerous and confusing world. I think that notion is very fitting. After all, dogs are often used as therapy animals. So those are my 5 theories for Dogmeat's origin. Now let's narrow this down as we get closer to crowning a winner. I don't think anyone's going to be surprised to hear that I'm choosing between the Shoggoth theory and the Synth theory. In my opinion, these two are pretty clearly superior to the others. So let's compare them side by side. There are more solid in-game clues for the Synth theory, but the Shoggoth theory can easily encompass Dogmeats from every Fallout game. It's exactly the kind of thing that Bethesda would come up with as something that gives the Dogmeats a consistent backstory for them to work with and doesn't really retcon anything. Another strength of the Synth theory is that it does click very nicely with some of my other theories, including what I presented in Is the Sole Survivor a Synth, and also something I touched upon in What Caused the Broken Mask incident. In that video, I mentioned that there are a few clues that could point to a conspiracy within the Bioscience division. To avoid spoilers, I won't get too specific, but there are a few ways that could click very nicely with Dogmeat being a Synth. Though it's not as if there's any conflict between any of my other theories and the Shoggoth theory, it just isn't necessarily closely related to anything I've covered. It could be related to the Mysterious Stranger, but it doesn't have to be. It functions fine on its own and the two theories don't conflict. So at this point in my investigation, I was very torn because something felt wrong. Joel Burgess said that there are several intentionally conflicting clues in the game, but I only found a significant number of what we'd call direct in-game clues for the Synth theory. There should be at least one more trail with at least some more direct clues rather than more indirect clues that one really has to speculate on to get meaning from. So I felt like I was missing something, and that wasn't the only thing that felt wrong. The Synth theory felt too easy. The way the clues for it are hidden in such plain sight makes it feel like a misdirect, like a trap if you will, which I found very concerning, because when the writer is setting up a mystery with multiple trails leading to different conclusions, the easiest trail is almost always wrong. Think about how Agatha Christie wrote murder mysteries. There's almost always a character with an obvious motive that she establishes early on to use as a misdirect. This allows the real culprit to fly under the radar for the duration of the story. But if the reader is clever, they can pick up on Agatha's clues and sniff out the real culprit by the end of the story. So I decided that I needed to give everything another look, because there had to be clues for theories other than the synth theory that I was missing. And I did find something that I may have overlooked. Remember the comic on Clayton Holdren's balcony? Like we discussed already, the obvious implication here is that this links German Shepherds to the Institute, which supports the synth theory, but I actually think this comic might be a double standard. As in, I think Bethesda might just be using the same clue to both hint at the correct theory, but also trick us into following it down the wrong trail. So how else can we interpret this clue? Well, there's something I took note of after a second glance. Its title is Have Dog Will Travel, but the cover isn't just a person and a dog. They're doing something peculiar, canoeing down the river, and there's a fishing rod here. Most of the Astoundingly Awesome Tales covers are pretty simple. It's a fish man holding a lady, it's an alien, it's a Frankenstein guy, etc. But there's a lot going on in this one, so could these details have hidden meaning? Maybe, so with that in mind I looked more closely at Clayton Holdren, along with his department, the Bioscience Division. And I found another reference to water in a bioscience terminal entry called Sim Zoology Initiative Phase 2 Development Journal. I'll just read the necessary parts. What to create? We've engineered creatures that inhabit the sky and land. The next logical step is a creature of the sea. Have to pitch this as the first step in a broader plan. What else could go in the aquatic habitat? Can we grow food there? What other experiments could we do? Could we develop underwater synth models to carry out seabed salvage operations? Probably far-fetched. Need to work on this more. So there are these two ties between Clayton Holdren and his bioscience division and water. What could they mean? Well, when I read this, I recalled something that came up in my research. In the Cthulhu mythos, the old ones primarily used Shoggoths for underwater labor. And seabed salvaging is underwater labor, isn't it? I'll also point out that the letters for Old One are in Clayton Holdren's name. So we may just be onto something here. And the trail doesn't end here. The person and the dog on the comic are canoeing down a river. In other words, they're following the water. And in a way, that's what we just did, isn't it? We started with this reference to water in Clayton Holdren's quarters, followed it through that connection to Clayton Holdren, and found more water. So maybe we're meant to approach this like we are symbolically canoeing down the river, by following these references to water. So let's see if we can keep going and see where this trail leads us. There is a reference to Nahant in this terminal entry, which is a coastal town. The author is hoping to collect useful data for the zoology project there. The only place in Nahant that really makes sense for that is the Nahant Oceanological Society. So I explored here and didn't find anything obviously related to Dogmeat, but there is another terminal entry that references a different body of water, Lake Quannapowitt. So I followed the water again and searched around there. Apparently there was a fishing tournament here just before the war, and it was a disaster because someone has been illegally dumping radioactive waste into the lake. The flyers for the tournament mention the General Atomics Galleria to the south. Why? Well, there's one last body of water just beyond the Galleria, Dark Hollow Pond. So I followed the water again to Dark Hollow Pond, and along the coast of this body of water there is a little raider camp with a dog. It also has a little fishing spot. So by following the trail of water starting with Clayton Holdren, we do find the things featured on the comic's cover, a person, a dog, and a fishing rod. So what could this be meant to hint? Well, by following the water, we found the dog. So if this is indeed one of the trails Joel was referring to, then the hidden meaning we're meant to discern from this is more than likely that following the water somehow leads to a theory about Dogmeat. And Shoggoths are associated with water in the Cthulhu mythos, specifically underwater labor, a topic that is touched upon along this trail in that bioscience terminal entry, and that department head's name does contain the letters for Old One. At this point I was thinking, okay, the connections are there, but they're loose at best. The synth theory is still better. But then I did some research about this location and I found something that tipped me in this direction. The editor ID for this location confirms that it was in fact made by Joel Burgess. Like I said in the beginning, I think that Joel was one of the main visionaries behind Fallout 4's Dogmeat and that he was a big part of laying this mystery out for us. I also consulted with some other Fallout experts on this because I'm not very techie myself, so big thanks to Analog Breakdown and Anachorite. Developers don't always leave their editor IDs in the game files. In fact, it's more often they don't. I was actually hoping to find out who placed the comic, who wrote the terminal entries, and who worked on all the locations we visited along this trail in addition to this. Because I think Joe Burgess may have done a lot of this, but unfortunately only this structure has an editor ID. But that in itself may be a clue. Perhaps Joe made sure to sign this structure, 1 to hint that this trail of water is intentional, and 2 to tell us that this is where it ends. So given all this information, I'm comfortable assuming that this is indeed one of the clue trails that Joel alluded to in this quote. Sure, the connections are a bit loose, but if there are multiple conflicting trails in Fallout 4, and this is the best thing I came up with in addition to the Synth theory, then I am inclined to think that this is indeed one of those aforementioned multiple conflicting trails. So now it's time to crown the winner. When writers focus on hinting 2 main theories to their audience, the harder to discern one is almost always right, because that's what makes the better story. Hence, I'm going with Dogmeat is a Shoggoth precisely because it is less obvious than the Synth theory. The shape-shifting ability of Shoggoths explains how he's a purebred German Shepherd despite that being unlikely. Being a fairly intelligent creature explains how he seems so well trained and anticipates the sole survivor's needs, along with being so mentally complex despite appearing to be a dog. The history of Shoggoths in the Cthulhu mythos fits very well with Dogmeat's independent nature, being a free spirit as Mama Murphy puts it. And to top that all off, this can easily encompass the Dogmeats from previous Fallout games without really retconning anything. But wait, in the show Cooper Howard does call CX-404 Dogmeat, and aren't we pretty sure that that's a real German Shepherd? Well yeah, my read on this is it's a fan service moment. I don't think we're meant to take his use of the name Dogmeat too seriously. Remember, he also calls the lake monster a gulper, but that isn't the same creature as the gulpers that we know from Far Harbor. These are fan service moments, we're not meant to take them too seriously. So perhaps the Dogmeats from the games are all Shoggoths that take a liking to the player characters and decide to follow them. And if you're not convinced by what I've presented so far, I have some icing on the cake that might win you over. As I was editing this video, I was reminded of something that I mentioned early on that in my mind all but confirms that this is the right theory. So I decided to get my mic back out and add this in. This theory is based on the notion that this comic is meant to hint that we should follow these references to water like we're metaphorically canoeing down a river. So why am I bringing this up again? Well, remember, Fallout 4's Dogmeat is based on Joel's dog, whose name was River. So yeah, the fact that this dog's name was River is enough to convince me that all this stuff with water is intentional. I'm not making something out of nothing. Now, will I stack this with the Nate and Nora's dog theory? Well, there is something about the dog bowl that we have yet to cover. Upon returning to the House of Tomorrow after leaving Vault 111, one will discover that the dog bowl is missing, but it's not gone. It actually got moved to the backyard of the house next door. Why would Bethesda do this? Well, look what's in this direction from the House of Tomorrow, a stream, aka water. So once again, let's follow the water and see where it takes us. If we follow it through this hook here, it eventually becomes a dry riverbed right around where this shack is. And look what we can find inside, gray tortoise cigarettes. So could this shack belong to the mysterious stranger? If so, then perhaps Bethesda is using the dog bowl to lead us here in order to hint that this is where Nate and Nora's dog disappeared too. Maybe the mysterious stranger kidnaps their dog to make a Shoggoth version of it to accompany the sole survivor on their post-apocalyptic adventure. However, I think the reality of this shack is more complicated. You see, there's another character that's known to carry these cigarettes, Nick Valentine, and because of that, many fans, including myself, theorize that there is a connection between these two characters. Also, the shack is obviously designed to have a vantage point of the Wicked shipping fleet lockup, as if the owner of the shack was watching that place. Why would someone be spying on this company? Well, there's a holotape there called Wicked Business, and it reveals that the owners of Wicked Shipping made a deal with none other than crime boss Eddie Winter. So I think it's likely that Bethesda's intent here is that the original Nick Valentine was using this shack to watch the Flynn brothers as part of his investigation into Eddie Winter's crime ring. But if that's the case, then what does that have to do with Dogmeat? Well, I believe that I've stumbled onto a bigger story here that really deserves its own video. So I'm going to save the mystery of this shack for another day. What I will say for this video is that I do not believe this is a coincidence. I do believe that the dog bowl and the stream are meant to lead us here. I think that is intentional and that there is a story here that's going to involve Dogmeat, Nick Valentine, and the mysterious stranger. To conclude my theory for this video, at this point I do believe that Nate and Nora's dog was always a Shoggoth. And this Shoggoth is of course Dogmeat. I believe that Dogmeat waited 200 years for the sole survivor because he anticipated that the sole survivor would need a friend to help navigate this strange new world that they found themselves in. What a beautiful theory. Yes, I'm aware that I said that Dogmeat is definitely a Synth in the Soul Survivor video. I guess I made a hasty assumption there, and that's my bad. Another thing that I'll point out is that the Eldritch statue in Dunwich Borers is underwater, so perhaps the idea here is it was built by Shoggoths. Maybe I'll investigate this further in the future. So that's all for this one, folks. That's why I believe that Dogmeat is a Shoggoth. I want to take a second to tell you about Fallout for Hope. Fallout for Hope is a charity initiative that raises money through Fallout-themed content. The team is currently fundraising for the Alzheimer's Association. So if you're interested in getting involved, supporting a campaign, or simply finding out more, see the link in the description. That'll take you to my Tiltify campaign. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and share this with your friends. Do you believe I got this right? Let me know in the comments. Thanks again, folks, and I'll see you next time.